everybody. Hello. Tim's here with Alex Kahn. Hi, everybody. Tim is here with Alex Kahn. Alex has a wonderful YouTube channel. One of the few YouTube channels that I actually watch videos from occasionally. I don't know if you saw our last conversation, but I'll put a link above to it. Yeah, Alex has sensibilities that very much align with mine when it comes to a lot of these manifesting ideas, law of assumption ideas, and dare we say it, robotic affirming. We're going to talk robotic affirming today. We want to talk about that because Alex has made a lot of videos recently about it. Alex, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
Very good to see you. And yeah, for people who don't know your face, do you want to just briefly or not briefly give them a, short story about, how you came into this stuff and how you apply it in your own life and while you're on YouTube?
Yeah. So I mean, back before any of it, I guess the way that it all began was my first success story, you could say, was back when I was, in high school. And I was actually I went through some tough times in high school, even before that. Basically, my mom died when I was really young. Got pulled out of school, had a really hard time kind of integrating back into school, and we moved, and there was just a lot of things for me at that age when I was about like through the age from 10 to 12. I had a lot of basically negative thoughts, that impacted me in a way where I was very closed off socially. I was kind of just stuck to myself, kept to myself, didn't really want to social interaction, all that. And especially at that age, it's a very formative age. People are kind of assimilating into their different social groups, whatnot, all this stuff. Basically, I got fed up with my kind of situation one day. This was around, I think I was a sophomore in high school, and I wrote down the names of three of the guys at my high school that I wanted to become friends with. I was like, if I could be friends with these guys, they were cool, they were sociable, they were extroverted, they were outgoing. And I was like, if I could just be friends with them, my life would be completely different. And I had friends at the time, but we would kind of just play video games and stuff like through middle school to the beginning part of high school is kind of like a form of escapism, is what I would say. And I was like, yeah, I want to do cool stuff. I want to, go out. I want to all the stuff that I wanted. I wanted to have that experience in high school and do all the stuff that I saw other people doing. So these kids, these three guys at my school, they were like some of the most popular kids at the school. I had no connection to any of them. Like I barely even interacted. I don't think they even knew who I really was. I mean, they must have been aware of me or seen me or whatever, but within like a year from there, by junior year, they were my three best friends. And so that was my first manifestation. If you want to really get back to the very beginning of when I heard about The Secret, started studying the law of attraction, all that. And since all of that, I've had a lot of different experiences, a lot of different kind of successes using this stuff. Also other areas where, as all of us do, certain areas, these principles, kind of like Tim talks about on his channel, these things seem to work for some people in certain areas very well, and then other people, they might struggle using some of these ideas. They might struggle being able to manifest success in certain areas of their life. So me posting on my channel and all that it's just a culmination of my experience ever since I found out about these things, and ever since I've used them in my life to kind of share my experience, but also as a method as well to kind of inspire others and help share and almost reinforce for myself and everybody that you're aware of these things, but you get so caught up in the 3D all the time. We get hypnotized by the 3D. And so repetition is key, I feel like, when it comes to understanding that we, through our energy, through our affirmations, through our intention, that we are having this effect on our outside world, that we are experiencing these magical things. We've had these things happen before. And it's about being able to tune into that understanding, know that we have that power to do that, and essentially be able to consciously create rather than unconsciously, which is what we end up doing a lot of the time. So a little bit of a roundabout story, but that's essentially how it all began.
It's great. Thank you. Yeah, and that's a great story. I'm curious, were those three guys tight before you befriended all of them?
Yeah, they were all three. The three of them were friends.
Yeah.
And through various different circumstances, yeah, it ended up being that I was essentially like the fourth friend.
Right. Through the
They
bridge of
were,
incidents.
yep, the bridge of incidents. And like I said, I had no like, yeah. So that was interesting.
It's great. Yeah. And I mean,
Yeah,
it just goes to show, like you said, so many of for many of us at least, of our most successful or coolest manifestation stories, so before we had any idea, consciously of what these principles and ideas we're talking about.
yeah.
And one thing that, always comes through with your videos and, your advice is you've got a very eclectic way of looking at this stuff where you're not dogmatic at all, and you're very willing. We both, it's one reason that we're friendly about this stuff is we're very willing to look at different sources and different approaches, because they're all pointing at generally the same thing. And there's so many different teachings that can be useful if we don't try to pigeonhole ourselves and say, well, this is how I have to do it. And we were talking before we started recording, you had this great video a couple of weeks ago. I'll link to it, called The Harsh Truth About Manifesting, I think it was called. Why do you think, and obviously you can't answer this fully, but like, why do you think we see such dogmatism in this space all the time, especially seemingly on Reddit, which you're my go-to for knowing what's happening on Reddit, because I refuse to basically go on there, and you read genuinely uplifting, success stories. But yeah, especially seemingly on Reddit and also on YouTube, where people are so dogmatic. Why does that tend to happen so often, do you think?
I think it's a part of human nature. I think that human beings, we tend to gravitate towards black and white thinking, which is to say, this is either all good or this is all bad. You see it perpetuated in all kinds of areas, especially like when it comes to politically or religion or certain things that are very triggering for people, but in any form of ideology. So when it comes to these types of teachings, it's like either this way or it's either my way or the highway. It's either this is all right, this is all correct, and this is all bad, or I'm the one that's right and you're you're all wrong, right? I mean, there's that tendency in human nature to gravitate towards that. I would say that that's a kind of primitive way of viewing things, because I think that once you kind of evolve and once you kind of have gone through a lot of experience, you're going to see that, as it said in the Kabbalion, that all truths are but half truths, and things are really in shades of gray. As far as in reality, things, there's multiple ways to do something. There's always more than one opinion. There's always, you see people that are successful, there's always different kinds of viewpoints that these people have and different types of things that their opinions, and they might all have some validity to them, but it's what's important is understanding how can we use what these people have done and kind of stand on their shoulders and use what is going to work for us in terms of our own personality, in terms of our own preferences, in terms of our own who we are as a person, to kind of sift through this and really apply it. I come from a standpoint of being like completely practical with this stuff. I don't, a theory is cool, and sometimes it's fun to indulge in the theory and whatnot, but ultimately, like, look at the people that you want to be like, the people that you aspire to be like. Are these people just sitting there behind their computers on Reddit forums, or have they actually gone out into the world and embodied these things that they brought into existence in life? And so, that's where I look at it from. But yeah, I mean, like, to answer your question, I think it's part of I think it's an unfortunate part of the human condition, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you for the most part. And I still find it shocking. I just always, like you, again, we have a lot of similarities in this regard. Like, I just look at this stuff as like, when I discovered it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so practical. Even though it's far out sounding a lot of the time, like what it's getting at is this very, I call it like a practical form of spirituality, but you could also just look at it as like uncommon yet practical psychological advice, at least the majority of it. And I always went into it with just the idea of like, well, hopefully some of this can help me. I don't have to take any of it like as like, this is the way to do it, but this is stuff I can experiment with and see what works. And even if only a little part of it works, I can utilize that and just simply disregard the rest and appreciate the little part that does work. And that's certainly how I've integrated these ideas into my own life, is by taking these little fragments and segments from different teachers that I all love. So yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm still blown away with when people come at it from this, like, you're doing it right, you're doing it wrong, this is how you have to do it. It just seems so uh short-sighted, like, and not every talk about like evolving consciousness, we're gonna get like it's so non-evolved, right, and so non-practical to view it from such like a black and white lens. That's what Marv and I have been discussing a lot recently. Is like none of this stuff for manifestation advice in general, certainly for relationship advice, is going to be black and white. Like, I'm sorry, like it's so gray. Relationships are so nuanced in terms of people's emotions, where they're at. To just say this is how you do something is a good way to drive away a partner, in my opinion. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that there's so many areas in human life. It just goes to show that we as collectively as human beings, we have work to do because there's so many things that people get so triggered over, and they can only see it through their own, like, their black and white type of thinking. I was reading Frederick Dodson. He has a book called Levels of Energy. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him or any of his books, but
I know Frederick, but I've watched a great video of his the other day, but I've never read that book. Long story short.
yeah. So it's basically about levels of consciousness. The same idea as David Hawkins' scale, right? But it's really interesting listening to that book because it's like okay, he's like, these types of people are at this level of consciousness, and you're just like, okay, yeah, that actually sounds about right. And a lot of the people that are in that super black and white type of thinking, I get comments too that is just like people getting triggered over what I'm saying. And the thing is that if you are getting triggered over watching like this type of content, then you have work to do, because really cultivating, you've talked about this before, I talk about this all the time, it's cultivating that kind of inner equilibrium and cultivating that state of neutrality. There's many words you could put towards this, but when it comes to attachment styles, that's another interesting analogy to this. It's like somebody that's securely attached. Well, we want this relationship, right? We like this relationship. We prefer to have this nice relationship, but we don't need it. We don't have all that needy energy, that overly attached energy, that anxious attachment in terms of attachment theory. It's like over here. And then there's that fearful avoidant that's over here. And so when it comes to our goals that we want to bring into our life as well, there's the same, you could liken it to the same type of thing. But cultivating that inner stability is what essentially, if you really believe in all these teachings, kind of like you talk about, as within, so without. So you need to cultivate this inner, you need to be all right and not be so flipped around by your 3D or by this outside stimulus. When you do that, your attention is what's creating. So when you are allowing yourself to be diverted in all these different directions, up and down, you have no emotional stability. You're completely thrown off course by everything. You're not going to be able to sustainably create the results that you want in your life. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
so hugely important. And so many of these ideas, to try to simplify them, simple to say, harder to practice, but so many of these ideas come back to basically changing your reactivity. If you can work on how you react to things and get better at reacting in a way that makes you feel more neutral, basically, where you're not as affected when something quote unquote bad happens, doing that can change your life. I mean, like, there's such power there. And it doesn't sound glamorous when it's like, well, just react more neutrally to things, but making that choice, because it is a choice, doing that can be life-changing. I mean, that's why something like the 7-day mental diet of Emmett Fox is popular 70, 80 years after he wrote that little pamphlet, because it's like, if you just become aware of how reactive you are for even a short period of time, a lot of us are going to realize, holy shit, this is like ruling my life. My reactivity is controlling
Yeah.
the shape of my reality, basically, and that's, I don't mean that esoterically. It's like, it's just do an exercise like that and you'll realize that.
Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. It is literal, because that's how we get led around by the 3D or by these circumstances, right? And then if we know that our attention, our awareness is what's creating our reality, then it's like, it just makes sense that as soon as we're aware of being triggered, as soon as our attention is on this thing that's triggering us, this is the thing too, is like, people, it's not to say to like turn off your emotions. I think that people interpret stoicism as like you need to suppress and like cut off your emotions. It's like you still want to process them, you still want to be aware of them. But ultimately, at a certain point, you have to realize that kind of dwelling in this, you know, if you look at the scale of consciousness, the lowest scales are shame, guilt, like the victim type thinking. Well, the victim type thinking is you're always at the effect of the 3D.
Yeah.
That's to say, oh, it's always this fault. It's the school's fault. It's the government, right? Whatever, whoever you have an opportunity to cast blame outside of yourself, you're then saying, okay, I don't have the power. I'm always at the effect of circumstance. I'm not at the cause because it's all of these things that are causing me to feel this way. So no matter what we're going through, it's important to just come to that understanding. At a certain point, you have to, process your emotions, get through, and it's not to say that because people nowadays, there's a lot of uh I think people again misinterpret these types of ideas and say, oh, you just don't want me to feel things, and you're not validating my feelings. Well, it's this is for your own best interest. Like if you want to create the results that are going to eventually make you feel good, you have to be able to control your attention, and you have to be able to control what it is that you are essentially like, whether you want to call it frequency, vibration, if you want to look at it from quantum physics, or if you want to look at it from a psychological perspective, what thoughts you're entertaining, what you're dwelling on. But all of these people, Maxwell Maltz, any of the esoteric writers and authors that you mentioned, Emil Coué, any of these people, they're all really saying the same thing. And so, yeah, and there's a lot of paradoxes in this stuff. That's why also the dogmatic thinking isn't helpful either, because
Exactly. It's so, yeah, you can think you understand something intellectually, and then you, like, the next day you feel like you don't understand it at all intellectually. At least that's what happens for me. Like, and you, I think you start to embrace that uncertainty and go more with how you're feeling. But like, I don't know, when I have intellectual quandaries about this stuff now, I usually just wait. Like, usually I just wait a couple of days and they kind of sort themselves out, because this is such a whole body, mind body processing thing that, like, there's a reason, like I've been really into Joel Goldsmith the last couple of years. There's a reason that basically his whole thing is just like, you just sit and don't expect anything, and basically the golden key of Evan Fox too. It's like you just sit and just you do nothing, and basically just admit that God is here right now. And like, if you do that, in my experiences, any intellectual quandaries, or like, does this work or does not, like, they'll be answered, because there's something that transcends that, or that's deeper than that, that like,
Mhm.
hopefully integrating these principles allows us to feel more often, or not even feels, not even the appropriate word, but like realize more often. Because like, when you're at peace in the moment, I know you've been discussing this a lot lately in your channel too, like, just like, when you feel good in the moment, you take action, you take appropriate action. Coué and those people, those psychologists into autosuggestion always said that too. You're not just going to sit on your butt, generally speaking, if like you feel aligned. You're going to do what feels natural, and that is how I would argue the bridge of incidence is usually going to occur in our lives, right? um, Marvin and I, I've been talking to a lot of SP clients who are like, they're trying to do all these manifestation techniques to get their SP back, and it's like, have you written to your SP? Have you texted them? Have you tried to, sit down over coffee if possible to meet with them? Because like, those are appropriate aligned actions. Like, those are the common sense practical actions that I still think you're going to usually want to take along with all these cool, all this cool advice. Like, I wish someone told me 20 years ago I could just sit and think about God and things would kind of resolve themselves usually. And like, it took a long time for me to realize. Part of me probably understood that, like you in high school. In high school, probably I understood stillness in that way could do something for me. In the way that some part of you must have known writing those names down would do something for you. Maybe it's like a part of our mechanism as a, self-surviving, thriving mechanism. But like, actually realizing consciously that like this, you can use these things, like sitting down, contemplating God as a technique, quote unquote, it's very powerful, because then you just don't feel lost as much at the time. So I know I riffed there, but I know you dig what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, and everybody's gonna have like different language and things that they resonate with. So what you mentioned there too about like our natural kind of success mechanism, that sounds like Maxwell Maltz. And Maltz didn't really talk about God. And some people may not resonate with sitting there and contemplating God, but
Right.
some people might. Some people
Right.
might. That might be. And so everybody has to find again like what resonates for them and gives them that sort of inner stability that we're talking about, that inner peace, that inner equilibrium that's not being set off balance all the time, and that's not getting into this reactionary type of habit pattern all the time. That's ultimately what I think that we need to kind of, because you can get these little bursts of movement, you can get these little manifestations by not doing that, but ultimately do we want that sustained? Because you can attract the little success here, but it's like, and a lot of the SP stuff too is like, why I read some of these comments, I get some of them on my channel, and I see them all everywhere. And it's like, you got to think at a certain point too, why is it that you want to get this person back? Because if things ended in this very deleterious, like very just like kind of toxic way, like why do you want that person back? Like, and why are you attracted to that type of thing to begin with? It seems like it's coming from a scarcity type based mentality. It's like, I need this person. And when you're coming from that, the less and less likely that you're going to be able to achieve that. Ultimately, people will do techniques, but the techniques are there to lessen that needy type of attachment and that needy type of energy. And it's really an energetic dynamic. I mean, we're all made up of energy. So if you're doing these 10,000 affirmations that my SP's calling me and my SP's texting me, it's like, that's what's the underlying like dynamic between the two of you too. Eh, if things broke apart because they cheated on you or they did, this type of thing, why do you want that person? Why are you attracted to somebody that would be doing that anyways? And asking yourself, like, in what ways did you show up that kind of contributed to the way that things unfolded? I mean, there's just, like you said, there's so much nuance to it, but I think people get trapped in this, like, I want this person to conform by doing these techniques without even getting to the heart of like, what actually do I actually want in my life? Like, what type of relationship dynamic is healthy and is going to be something that is good for me to pursue? I mean, I see a lot of these, yeah, a lot of comments that are just like, you know, essentially their ex like monkey branched or cheated on them or like whatever the case. And it's just like, okay, like I think everybody as collectively, we have to like look at our standards and what it is that we're attracted to as well, because we all have these wounds, we all have these kinds of like, I know Maggie Murphy, Neville Goddess, I watched a video of hers where she's talking about like, she thought that she had a good relationship with her father, right? But it turns out that there were these things that she felt a little bit perhaps ignored or neglected or whatever. And so by chasing this person who's kind of giving you this, that's not being consistent, it's repeating that pattern. But do you really want to repeat that pattern, or do you want somebody that is consistent? Do you want somebody that is going to be somebody that you can, like I said, build a life together with? That's what you're going to be doing with somebody that's an SP. Whether you plan on having kids with this person or not, your lives are going to be intimately connected. So who is this person that you're chasing after? Who is this person that you're doing all these techniques for? Are they really what you want, or is it just that you feel so discombobulated and again put off center that you're now doing these techniques to feel this inner stability, which really needs to happen first before you should be doing the techniques, or before you should be bringing someone in to your life in this type of way? So I don't know. There's a lot. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of things that I think we need to ask ourselves, especially in this department as well.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, and I'm also glad where it does seem like, and again, you're more on top of it than I am, but I do see a little bit of a shifting on the online space, at least on YouTube, where more people are talking about SP situations in this more clear-eyed way, the way you just did. Um, I'm hoping it changes. It kind of needs to change. I mean, it doesn't need to change, but listen, like, we got to get real about it. And it is interesting because, this is the most intensively I've worked on it with SP clients. It's been the last month or so. so many of the issues that we hear in this space, it's like the SP situation, like kind of epitomizes like almost all of them, you know, like so much self-concept type of work. Um, you're like, when you like almost any SP instance, like what it's like, wow, we really get to look at that. So it's interesting. But it's also really effed up. How, you know, the denial of looking at the stuff that needs to be looked at, and hopefully that is changing. I mean, there's two things that I definitely want to touch base on. But the first is, we'll take less time. What's going on Reddit? What's going on with Reddit these days? There's been some good stories, as always, some good success stories. Like, are there any trends, any change in, you know, people's tone, or new things people are talking about? Or is it, the second thing I want to talk to you about, you know, get your, you know, your latest opinion on, is we both are into robotic affirmations. It does seem like robotic affirmations are, if anything, maybe growing in popularity. Is that something that's hot on Reddit right now? And yeah, anything else that's hot on Reddit?
Yeah, yeah, it is. There's been a couple posts that have like really kind of been like really actually good success stories from people using
Sure.
robotic affirmations. And so there's a lot of people that have been drawn to those posts. And I think, yeah, I think there is like a trend of that being used more and more. What I would say is that there's still this kind of outwardly focused uh mentality, I guess you could say. And
Yeah.
so I think, you know, there are successes with, there was one that was really popular that was like, me and my SP are together now. Um and I work at X place, right? And this lady had like really a really great success story with both of those. And so those things can work, and those clearly do work for people. I come from the general framework personally, where your sense of self, your self concept, really like using robotically affirming in that manner is, in my opinion, going to be your best use of your time. Because if you're spending all your time saying this person loves me, or this person's texting me, or it's just, that's outwardly focused. It's not actually getting into the heart of the matter, which is you're creating all this. Again, it goes back to you, right? So if you reflect upon, I'm feeling safe, I feel secure, I'm confident, stable, I'm secure, I'm attractive, I'm a magnet to the types of people that I want to attract. High quality people are attracted to me, or I am a high quality person that is magnetically attracted to other people that are up to my standard. Whatever, you know, those are maybe a little bit too convoluted, but essentially the goal being that you are cultivating this sense, and you are reprogramming yourself that you are worthy of love. You are worthwhile. You are this person that is worthy and deserving of these good things, and that can sustain them. It's not like some one-off thing, because when you affirm to the outside, like, oh, this person is sending me a text, or this person is coming back in my life, it's just, that's just about them. And so again, that's where I come from with it. The Reddit is a mixed bag. Some of the stories, and I try to share the ones that I resonate with, that I think are good. And there's a lot of, again, very dogmatic things on there that I don't really resonate with, and certain things that I think are kind of just like, it's like an echo chamber of this dogmatic thing is how it is, and a lot of keyboard theorizing, armchair
Yeah.
critics, and things like that. So
Yeah.
there's good and bad
Yeah.
on there, I think.
You're being kind, and thank goodness that we have you to sift through it. I mean, what's always, in my opinion, been tough about, like, for me, Reddit is great in theory. Like, we're talking specifically about law of attraction Reddit, and really, I mean, the law Neville Reddit more than anything. Um, excuse me, it's great. The idea of Reddit is great. The problem is that you have people theorizing up the wazoo, and all the theorizing and dogmatism often takes away from these wonderful success stories. Like the reason I shit on Reddit is not because there are not success stories. There are. And what's difficult is that the success stories are mixed with all this other really kind of, I would say toxic, but in the very least, rather dogmatic interpretation of these teachings. And it makes it very tricky. And I think a lot of people end up feeling kind of gaslit because they don't get the same results as these amazing success stories. And then they're told on this forum, and this happens to a lesser extent on other social media platforms, including YouTube, they're told on the forum that they're just doing it wrong. And if they did it right, that they would be fixed and that there's something wrong with them. So yeah, it's wonderful in some ways and just incredibly crazy in other ways. Yeah, I mean, robotic affirming, I'm glad that it keeps on being discussed, quite honestly. I personally feel like it's one of the more interesting techniques that's become popular since, Sammy and I guess other people, but mainly Sammy brought it back to attention a few years ago. I think this one's going to last, Alex. Like, I think that people are going to be using robotic affirming. A lot of people are going to be using it in the coming years. I don't think it's just a fad. I just think it aligns with a lot of the stuff Kuwait talked about and just the idea. I completely agree with you that self-concept affirmations are the way to go for most of us. But I just think the idea of doing that it's effective and it does something to your state when many other techniques don't. Like it just, because they're too complicated or they involve feeling something you can't easily feel. You can always say something to yourself over and over again. You can always do that. So I'm still a huge fan of that technique and I'm all for it being popular. I just don't like how it's dogmatized a lot of the time. Like a lot of the stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, I'd be curious actually, because I remember I watched one of your videos and I know you were talking about Emile Coué and then there's another guy, Charles
Baudouin.
Baudouin
You
or
would love
Baudouin.
that book. Yeah.
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 I actually tried to download it the other day. I tried to download like the PDF of it or whatever.
Yeah.
I think I found
You might have gotten it. You might have.
I think yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, it's an oldie. It's
I
hard to
just
find.
wanted to ask you because I know like essentially those guys are all hypnotists. And so
Right.
I think you were alluding to something about how really what you want to do is like get yourself into that hypnotic state, like before you begin using these suggestions. And I don't know. I know he was differentiating between autosuggestion and other types of suggestion, but I was wondering if you could kind of share, in your opinion, based off of what you've read from his book, also from Emile Coué, like what is the best kind of way to do this? I know there's like a lullaby technique that Joseph Murphy talked about, and he alluded to this as well, but like what do you
Yeah.
think is the best kind of way to practice this? I know people, another thing that's caught on is like these saturation sessions is what people are calling them.
Right.
But essentially that's just kind of, I think the same, again, another word for the same type of
It's
thing,
the
right?
same
Just like,
thing, right?
yeah.
The thing is, like with Kuwait, generally speaking, and again, guys, this is a nuanced answer. Okay, this isn't like this is how you do it. And when Alex is like, "What's the best way to do it?" We're not like this is how you have to do it. But Kuwait and those that school or whatever the Nazi school, as Charles Baudouin called it, the new Nazi school. They said your suggestions are most likely to take if you are in a, drum roll please, blah, 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 state akin to sleep. All these terms that people think Neville came up with were actually used by these guys. And they talked a lot, Baudouin talks a lot about in that book about contention, attention minus effort, which he says is most easily done in essentially a hypnotic, drowsy state. So, and he also talks about how you can train yourself to get better at this in a similar way to how like Neville talked about how you could, at the end of the day, think back and go over your day in reverse or whatever was one of the techniques that Neville sometimes talked about for training your attention and memory. But, Coué and these guys generally recommended that you did not have to be affirming the whole day, that, you could put yourself in a passive state, most importantly before bed. And once you relax your body, you recite your statement over and over again, kind of like a lullaby, like Murphy said. They also said it was highly recommended to do it in the morning upon waking. And the reason they said that is, generally speaking, those were the times where it was easiest to induce a suggestion because your mind's not in its normal state. I would argue that a lot of the stuff that Sammy and other proponents of saturation type affirmation, talk about is when you're affirming a lot, eventually your mind gets tired, and that it's able to basically sneak in, right? So the only effort in all these cases that you're making, the willpower you're using, is just to keep on saying the statement, but you're never analyzing the statement or using like any force. It's just you're saying it. Coué was a big proponent of saying it out loud, moving your lips, but you don't have to do that. There's plenty of testimonials of you just saying it silently to yourself, working. But the idea is, if you're doing robotic affirmations or saturation of, I'd say anything over 5 minutes, 5, 10, 15 minutes, up to hours and hours at a time, the idea starts to saturate your mind. What's interesting is Coué spoke about this a lot. He gave the metaphor, among others, of when you're hammering a nail. You hammer to get a nail out of something, you hammer it once or twice, it's not out yet. But if you keep on hammering, eventually the nail will come out. You'll be able to pull it out. Same idea, and also important to factor in here is what Coué always discusses of, we can only think one thing at a time. So it's really like one suggestion, one suggestion, one suggestion, one suggestion, one suggestion, one suggestion, one suggestion. So saturation, I definitely think, has its place. I think Sammy and others have proven that enough with some of their testimonials. But you don't have to do it all the time. The idea is just to get it. Once the idea is in there, it's good. But generally speaking, most of us are going to be wanting to constantly suggest positive things, positive self-concept to ourselves, because we're hearing a lot of negative suggestions throughout the day, period. I mean, that's incontrovertible, unless you're not around other people involved in culture in any way. I mean, there's negativity culturally everywhere. That conscious autosuggestion and affirmations can help neutralize.
Have you heard of John Kehoe?
Yes, I think you mentioned Kehoe last time. Yeah, I looked at some. Yeah.
Have you like read Mind Power or any of this stuff?
I did not. I looked at some of it. It looked interesting, and then, as usual, I had 800 other things I was looking at.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so many different ways of, I think, because there's also like the whole inner conversations thing, technique, whatever. Essentially, that's also stating an intent, or stating, if you're imagining an inner conversation, you're also affirming the content of the conversation. But there's also the ask formations. I don't know if, like, does Coué in them, they don't talk about asking yourself questions, do they?
No, but someone else does. Do you know where that was popularized?
There was a guy, I forget his name, but he wrote a book called Affirmations, and I believe that is where it originated.
The origin,
I think, but it's very possible that it could have originated from somebody else and he just kind of ran with it. But there's just so many different ways that you can go about this. John Kehoe, in his Mind Power, he has these 6 laws of the mind. The first being that thoughts are real forces. The second, that your mind is a sending and receiving station of thought. The third, that thoughts that are emotionalized become magnetized and attract like thoughts. The fourth is that you have the power to either entertain or dismiss any thoughts of your choosing. The fifth is that you have the power to insert any thought of your choosing into your mind. And the sixth is that the inner and the outer worlds are connected. And in his course, what he says to do is to pick one of these laws of the mind. For example, that thoughts are real forces, number 1, and contemplate this for 5 minutes. And what I found as well while I do this is that if I'm thinking about how my thoughts are real forces and I'm contemplating that fact that I'm literally having this impact by thinking a thought, it is sending out a vibration, much like me, like smacking this table. It's actually having a force in the world, that I'm going to then begin to entertain the thoughts that I want. But I think that many of these practices are just about that, about whatever it is that allows us to draw our attention to what it is that we want. I think also journaling can be very helpful because it's like the metacognition. It gives us, when we write it out on paper, sometimes we can write our intentions or our thoughts or our affirmations and then actually be like, oh, well, this actually, I'm realizing that by writing this, this is not what my dominant awareness has been focusing on. And actually now I'm realizing there's a weed here. If you liken the garden to a mind, like As a Man Thinketh and John Kehoe do, you're like, okay, well, maybe I need to, if I'm having this and I'm trying to overwrite this, I need to pull this thought out and put this one here, or I need to um basically reorient my thinking to what it is. Like I consciously have to keep choosing what I want to think. Like you said, the outer environment tends to be primarily negative. So I need to completely, like, basically discipline my awareness on a consistent basis to what it is that I am choosing to think, because otherwise it might, like Napoleon Hill talks about in Outwitting the Devil, you will be hypnotically, he talks about hypnotic rhythm, but it's essentially the same thing. You're going to be hypnotically hypnotized by the outer environment to start thinking along those lines, which are not going to be serving you. So I don't know. There's just so many different ways that we can practice this. But I think with robotic affirming, people get caught up with like, how long do I need to do this? And how long do I need to do that? And it's just like, yeah, you can do a saturation session. I think like 5 minutes, if you want to contemplate um, the fact that your thoughts are real forces, maybe that'll be help you kind of come up with some of your own original ideas. If you're getting bored by just this one affirmation or two affirmations or three affirmations, there's other ways that you can kind of just think about, okay, well, what is it, like if I could have anything that I wanted, ask yourself the right questions too. What is it that I would be dwelling on? If I didn't have to listen, if I didn't have to kind of be, the affirmation thing is interesting, because it's like, wouldn't it be nice if this was true? And that's actually one way to have like not that much resistance to what it is that you want to bring in, because it's like, instead of like, yeah, wouldn't it be nice? Because I'll think of stuff a lot of the times. I've talked about this lately on my channel, that I happen to get, a lot of the times I'll get stuff for free when I go places, or I'll get like really good things will be discounted for me, or I'll get good service. And it's like, because I have that general attitude that's like, wouldn't it be nice? Like I'm completely detached from that, because I don't really care if people are giving me free things. But it's like in these other areas, we are attached. So how is it that we can kind of like, yeah, wouldn't it be nice? How can we take that more gentle approach with our bigger goals, bigger desires? That's like, yeah, this would actually be kind of like, wouldn't it be nice? I mean, that's just one phrase that I keep thinking, because it really does encapsulate, for me at least, that more kind of like, yeah, it would be nice if this was a possibility. And sometimes gently getting ourselves in a more gentle state, where it's like, I'm starting to become more confident. I'm starting to feel like I can, take this action towards my goal. Or sometimes if we're feeling really resistant, just simply dwelling on the word itself, like peace. Um, if you're feeling a lot of inner anxiety and tension, sometimes it can be an uphill battle to say, oh yeah, like I'm making $10,000 a month. Well, maybe the first thing you want to do is just simply get into that inner place of stability, and sometimes just dwelling on the word peace to get you there. And then gently, more and more, like you can then start to say like abundance or success or whatever. Like those are Joseph Murphy style things. But again, there's just so many ways of doing this that it really is comes down to experimentation. Another one that I like is like getting in the mirror and just like telling yourself the shit.
Yeah.
That's like something that Tony Robbins talks about, because he's all about incantations and just getting into your body. And he obviously has a lot of success doing that. So it's like, that's another way you can do this. That's not really going to be robotic affirmations, but it's like, I'm going to go in the mirror and tell myself what it is that I want to think today, like start
Right.
my day off in this manner. And so there's just a lot of different ways that we can go about it. And depending on your emotional state, and depending again on you and what you like and what you prefer, experimenting with those things can be valuable, and to see what works for you, what you can make as part of your routine that feels good.
Yeah, I mean, so many good ideas there. I love those six laws, or six ways of looking at life, or statements, because again, I think a lot of what you're saying boils down to, as if we're creative beings, which we hear all the time in these circles, our creativity is we're so language based, right? I mean, that's why you hear like Neville talking about the tongue, right? Like in like, it can be a blessing or a curse. That's what Coué said. Like it's very simple to experiment with some of the ideas and different modes of saying things to yourself, whether it's this passive way or whether it's more active in the mirror. I mean, Claude Bristol was another guy, right? Like the mirror technique, like talking in the mirror. And like, yeah, I mean, you notice like Murphy talks about talking in the mirror too, but like Tony, when he talks about it, like it's more like getting into state. You can do that as well. Like it gets us out of our normal thinking patterns. And again, I mean, you know, having a conversation like this, like about this, I'm like, man, this is why I got into LOA. Cause like, you know, when I first got into like alternative counseling, basically it was all body based movement stuff. And it was like movement and talking out loud. And like, that's like, when you're like some of the stuff Tony recommends, like talking in the mirror and like, you know, how like you change your state, you change how you're reacting to things very easily by doing that. A lot of us do. So that's a great thing to experiment with too. Again, so many awesome tools and options. We don't have to limit ourselves by like saying this is how you do it, or listen to something on Reddit or YouTube saying this is the one way to do it. You know, you have to lock yourself into a room and, you know, affirm for 2 hours a day. Not to say that it's not going to work for some people, but the underlying principle, and this is why Kue is my favorite person of all these folks, is what you're saying, what you're thinking is like a constant, basically, choice. And it's like it's like we default to our conditioning and stuff like that, but like we have more of a say on it. I mean, that's what I think Keo is getting at a lot with those statements. We have more of a say on it, and we can directly alter it at the source by inserting something, a phrase we want, or you know, a say. It can be, I often think it's better if it is more informal, if like you're just riffing in front of the mirror, or just riffing, like, but it can be what we want as opposed to what we don't want, because both can't fit in at the same time. And like that Baudouin book, one reason it's so freaking great is he really talks about how quickly suggestion works, how quickly we think. And like, this is why this stuff's hard for most people. It's because we have a good thought, but then 10 negative thoughts can sneak in really quickly. And so this is about mitigating and figuring out ways to make that so it doesn't happen. So you got to be flexible and creative, as you just said. I mean, that's like probably the key to making it work is just trusting your flexibility and be willing to have stuff not work so you can find what works, as opposed to listening to like one special way or whatever. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that's again why it does help to have like these different various tools. But yeah, I do find that Kehoe's laws of the mind are extremely empowering. I'm pretty sure he based a lot of those laws basically off of, because As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, he uses that same analogy of that the mind is like a garden. And I feel like John Kehoe took that amazing analogy that James Allen gave us and created those 6 laws out of that, using that same type of metaphor in a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean, the fact that we have the power to entertain or dismiss any thoughts of our choosing is just straight up really powerful. Because a lot of the times we think that we just, again, we're just like, oh, like the same way that we react to our 3D, it's like we react to our own thoughts. We're like,
correct.
as if we have no control over this. And it's like,
Exactly.
no, like I actually have the power to dismiss those and to insert any thought of my choosing. And so contemplating that can be really, really empowering. And yeah, doing the stuff that Tony Robbins talks about, actually getting physiologically into the state is another way to get there as well, because they've done research. You know, you stand in that power pose or whatever, you stand like you use your body and you use your vocal projection, like your chemicals in your body are going to start to change, and you're going to begin to feel like that more. Another thing about the affirmations is that by affirming, a lot of people that have trouble visualizing, you naturally get those new internal representations, as they call them in NLP, or visualizations. You will naturally begin to see what you're talking about. So if you're telling yourself, I'm feeling good, I'm feeling like energetic, eventually you're going to begin to see that version of yourself. You're going to begin to embody it. And so really working with all the tools that we have at our disposal, I mean, it is a path that you have to kind of experiment with. And it's something where you're just gonna, if you really go and really dwell and use the things that we're talking about in this conversation right now, like it's almost impossible that you're not going to see some sort of outward change.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done it myself before, whether it's using Kehoe's contemplation things, using Napoleon Hill's thing in the mirror every day, Claude Bristol, Tony Robbins, any of these things, you stick with it, whether it's even a guided meditation that you listen to every single morning, just so that it gets you primed. And if you want to look at it from a psychological perspective too, it's like you're priming yourself to expect those good things now by taking in this good information, and these kinds of empowering ways of looking at things rather than the disempowering way. There's that book Persuasion by Robert Cialdini, which is also
Yeah.
like a psychological thing, but
Yeah.
it's like
Good book.
the way that you set things up is going to have a big it's like we're taking these lenses. This is an analogy I've been using lately. We're taking these lenses, like lenses that were shitty, that we didn't want before, which is like, why is everything so hard for me, or why is this like not working out, or blah blah blah. We like get rid of that, and we're just like, why is it that everything is like working in my favor? Why is it that everything is just I'm becoming better and better at manifesting? Why, like, the meta power with this too is just like adopting the phrase, or knowing that you are becoming more and more powerful, that you're becoming better and better at using these techniques. Because if you're sitting there doing this robotic affirming, but you're like, half of you is like, this doesn't even work, it's not really going to work. And that's the thing that's beautiful about what Tony Robbins talks about. When you get into that state, he's getting into that state where he believes this. He talks about how he was just like, he would be, at the beginning of his career, just like on the 405 or whatever that freeway is in LA, just like screaming to himself,
in the car,
like
right?
in the mirror, right? Like
Yeah.
revving himself up for these sessions, and people
Yeah.
probably looked at him like he was a psycho. But when he got there, he just closed that deal, or he just helped somebody go through a crazy transformation, because he's really, really embodying it on a visceral kind of level. And so again, there's so many different ways of going about this, and that's why that's why we're talking about, this whole dogma thing. It doesn't really have, there's no need for it. There's all these different people that are having success with all these different ways, and you might as well experiment and see what works for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So well said. Well, yeah, we have to wrap up, but we'll have one of these combos again soon. And we were talking before we went live. Alex might have a new book coming out sometime soon. It's going to be a good one. Alex, best way to reach you? I'll put your channel information obviously below in the description. But
Yeah.
any other way to reach you?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably going to be the best way. I mean, I have my Instagram and like other things written on there, but ultimately, yeah, just the channel. You can leave me a comment. Let me know anything you guys would be interested in covering, or any topics that you guys want to hear from. And with that being said, yeah, I mean, great conversation, and I hope that everybody watching this got something out of it. Like, you at least using something that we talked about to your benefit, because there's, again, so many different ways of going about it, and being able to embrace that fact, and not that there's only one way, is like gonna, I think, be really helpful for people on their journey with this stuff.
Yeah. You start to realize you can't fail in terms of like utilizing this stuff and having it positively affect your life, when you get out of that rigid lens and just realize like, holy cow, I have some if not all control of like my choice of my thinking, right? Like we were talking about. It's freaking powerful. Thank you again, Alex.
Yeah.
We'll talk soon. Bye everybody. Feel free to leave comments or any questions for us in the comments.
Thanks.